In this episode, we're going to do a rapid recall pass that ties together the major ideas you've been building across the course, with the goal of helping you retrieve the full blueprint in one smooth run. This is not a cram session where you try to stuff new facts into your head at the last second. It is a confidence pass that helps you remember what you already know by touching each major objective and triggering the mental models you can use on exam day. When you are new to cybersecurity, it is easy to remember details in isolation but feel uncertain when you need to connect them quickly. The purpose of this pass is to reinforce the connections, because incident leadership is about linking signals to decisions, decisions to actions, and actions to outcomes. As you listen, you should feel yourself moving from preparation to detection to response to reporting to improvement across multiple attack types and scenarios. Think of this as the final rehearsal where you practice staying calm while your brain retrieves the big picture. Start with the foundational mindset. Incident leadership is about restoring trust and maintaining control while balancing speed, evidence, and business impact. You learned early that preparation is not a nice-to-have, but the difference between chaos and structure, because policies, playbooks, logging, backups, roles, and escalation paths shape what you can do under stress. You built the idea of clear ownership through our ACI, where responsibilities are defined so tasks do not fall into gaps during incidents. You reinforced that training and exercises matter because they make the organization's response muscle memory stronger, not because they create perfect performance. You also learned that well-being is part of operational readiness, because a burned-out team makes slower, riskier decisions. If you can recall nothing else in a stressful moment, recall that strong incident response begins before the incident, and the exam often rewards choices that reflect that disciplined preparedness. That baseline mindset supports every other objective you have practiced. Next, recall the incident lifecycle thinking that helps you decide what to do first, what to do next, and what to do later. Early in an incident, you prioritize containment and scoping because stopping ongoing harm matters, and scoping prevents you from fixing the wrong thing. You learn to build a timeline to reduce guesswork because sequence reveals attacker methodology and clarifies what evidence is relevant. You also learn to distinguish authentication from authorization and to treat identity as a hub that connects many systems, which helps you estimate blast radius quickly. As incidents move toward stabilization, you focus on validation and recovery, proving that access is trustworthy again and that services can operate safely. Later, you move into reporting, compliance readiness, and lessons learned, turning experience into improved capability. This life cycle is not a rigid checklist, but it is a mental compass that keeps you from being pulled into random actions by panic or noisy details. Now recall your rapid recognition skills for common attack categories, because the exam often tests whether you can name the pattern and choose the matching response priorities. For email attacks, the recognition cues include urgency, authority, odd requests, suspicious links, and the use of communication as persuasion, not just as a delivery mechanism. For credential attacks, the recognition cues include patterns in authentication attempts: wide and shallow for credential stuffing, wide and slow for password spraying, deep and repetitive for brute force, and clean successful access followed by recovery changes or mailbox rules for credential theft. You also learned that email and credentials are intertwined, because a compromised mailbox can become a gateway to password resets, internal phishing, and long-lived persistence through forwarding rules. These recognition cues matter because they allow calm first decisions, like locking down access, revoking sessions, and validating account changes without being distracted by blame or speculation. The course reinforced that naming the pattern correctly improves both technical response and stakeholder communication. Recall the mapping mindset for credentials, which is the ability to trace methodology and impact across accounts and systems. You practice thinking in terms of hubs and spokes, especially when single sign-on, SSO, is involved, because one successful authentication can unlock multiple services. You learn to classify accounts by role and privilege, such as user accounts, service accounts, and administrative accounts, because the same compromise can have very different blast radius. You practice distinguishing between what an attacker can do immediately and what they can do after creating persistence through new keys, delegated access, or permission changes. You reinforce that email is a multiplier because it supports password resets, social engineering, and internal trust abuse. You also learned that visible login patterns are only the start. The real impact depends on what was accessed, what was changed, and what trust was altered. This mapping skill shows up on the exam as questions where several answer choices seem plausible until you think about blast radius and follow-on movement. Now recall the cloud mental framework, which centered on shared responsibility and misconfiguration clues rather than on memorizing vendor-specific features. You learn to differentiate cloud incidents by whether they are identity-led, exposure-led, or service abuse, because those categories predict both evidence and impact. You reinforce that misconfiguration is a common cause of exposure, such as overly permissive access to data storage or overly broad network access to sensitive services. You learn that identity compromise can lead to control plane misuse, where attackers create new keys, widen permissions, and establish persistence. You also practice that service abuse can show up as cost spikes, unexpected resource creation, and abnormal usage patterns, and that it can be driven by stolen keys or overly powerful automation credentials. In managing cloud incidents, you built the sequence of contain exposure, rotate secrets, and verify recovery, because cloud incidents often hinge on removing public access, invalidating stolen trust, and proving the environment is back to a known good state. These are the cloud objectives you should be able to retrieve quickly when a scenario mentions cloud consoles, policies, storage exposure, or sudden usage changes. Next, recall the supply chain framework, which was fundamentally about trust pathways across vendors, dependencies, and partner relationships. You learned to differentiate vendor breach, dependency poisoning, and trust abuse, and you practiced explaining how each abuses legitimacy rather than brute force. You traced supply chain methodology as a chain: upstream compromise, weaponization, distribution through legitimate channels, and downstream execution and persistence. You learned to describe impact using breadth, depth, and duration, because supply chain incidents can affect many organizations and can persist through trusted processes. For management, you built the triad of scope, blast radius, coordinate, and remediate, because supply chain incidents require inventory, cross-team alignment, and actions like patching, rebuilding from trusted sources, and resetting trust through key rotation and access review. You also reinforced that coordination is not optional because partners and vendors hold critical information and because your organization may be downstream or may become upstream for others. On the exam, supply chain questions often test whether you focus only on your own systems or whether you recognize the need to coordinate and scope across relationships. Now recall the ransomware story, because ransomware combines technical disruption with decision pressure and communication challenges. You differentiated ransomware by leverage, including encryption, data theft, and sabotage of recovery, and you connected that to the business stopper impact through dependency failures and operational downtime. You traced ransomware methodology as initial access, privilege gain, encryption, and extortion, emphasizing that encryption is often the final phase of a longer intrusion. You practiced managing ransomware through containment, recovery choices, and risk trade-offs, including restore versus rebuild decisions and the importance of protecting and validating backups. You also practiced ransomware communications, emphasizing stakeholder updates, controlled interaction with attackers if it occurs, and legal coordination that supports defensible messaging and decision-making. The key ransomware objective is that the incident is not only about technical cleanup. It is about maintaining control, preventing spread, restoring operations safely, and communicating without creating additional harm. On the exam, ransomware scenarios often include tempting shortcuts, and the right answers usually reflect structured containment and recovery planning rather than panic-driven actions. Recall reporting, remediation, closure, and process improvement as the later stage objectives that turn incidents into lasting capability. You practiced writing incident reports that matter, meaning they clearly explain what happened, what the impact was, what evidence supports the conclusions, and what actions were taken. You reinforce that compliance-ready reporting requires capturing what auditors expect, such as timelines, decision records, scope, and control effectiveness, without making claims you cannot support. You learned that root cause analysis must be evidence-driven rather than guess-driven, because guessing creates false confidence and misdirects remediation. You also built closure criteria, meaning you do not close an incident until containment is stable, recovery is verified, and follow-on risks like stolen credentials or persistence paths are addressed. Finally, you practiced metrics and improvement, focusing on meaningful measures that support leadership decisions and process adjustments that reduce friction and increase speed over time. These objectives often appear on the exam as questions about what to document, when to declare closure, and how to improve without overcorrecting. Now pull all of this together into one final decision-making loop you can run in your head. You detect a signal, and you classify the likely attack pattern using rapid recognition cues. You map blast radius by identifying the identity hub, the systems touched, and the privilege level involved. Then you contain to stop ongoing harm. You validate access and configuration to remove persistence and confirm what was accessed or changed. Then you recover with an appropriate restore or rebuild strategy and verify the environment is trustworthy again. You communicate consistently to stakeholders, coordinate across boundaries when partners or vendors are involved, and document decisions and evidence so reporting is accurate and defensible. Finally, you close the incident only when the environment is stable and the lessons learned have been captured in a way that improves the next response. If you can rehearse that loop calmly, you can answer many scenario questions even when details are unfamiliar. The blueprint is not a pile of isolated facts. It is a coherent response discipline. As we close, treat this rapid recall pass as your last full system check, not your last-minute scramble. You now have a set of stable mental models: trust and control, timeline thinking, hub-and-spoke identity, blast radius estimation, and least regret decision-making under uncertainty. You have scenario recognition cues for credential, cloud, supply chain, and ransomware incidents, and you have response sequences for each that emphasize containment, validation, recovery, and verified restoration of trust. You have the communication posture that keeps stakeholders aligned and keeps legal coordination integrated, especially when extortion pressure is present. You also have the reporting and improvement mindset that turns incident work into organizational learning rather than a one-time fire drill. If you carry these models into the exam, you can stay calm because you will know how to think, even when you do not instantly know the answer. That is what it means to hit every objective in one pass. You can retrieve the whole blueprint as a connected response discipline.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.